Today's Amud is Succah Daf Hey Amud Aleph, at the bottom of Daled on the base, approximately 6 lines from the bottom. So we discussed that having a sukkah that's below 10 tefachim is possible. That's the Mishnah says. And we saw it dices to having hutzim yodim mitachas. It says if the leaves go below 10, then it creates a certain what's it called? It's unlivable. The gemorah now wants to discuss how do we know a sukkah has to be 10 tefachim high. Where did it say in the Torah? The sukkah's got to be 10 tefachim. So we're on 6 lines from the bottom of the Daled base. Says the gemorah, how do you know the sukkah has to be 10 tefachim high? It says in the Brisa, Rav Chanina, Rav Yechel, Rav Chaviva, Masni. These 4 greats, they taught the following. And the gemorah has a correction. B'chulei Seder Mayed, in the whole Seder Mayed, right? The whole 6 Sidrei Mishnah, the whole Seder Mayed. Kol Kiyai Zuga, wherever it mentions these 4 Zugas, these 2 Zugais, these 2 pairs, i.e. these 4, Chilufi, change Rabbi Yechanan or Maili Rabbi Yonasan. Don't read in, it says Rabbi Yechanan, read Rabbi Yonasan. Okay, so it's Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan, or Rabbi Chaviva. So what did these 4 say? Aron, in the base of Mikdash, there was Aron. The luchais, the tablets were sitting in this Aron, in this ark. So how big was the ark? Tisha. It was 9 tefachim. The kapyrus, sitting on top of the Aron, you had a kapyrus, a cover. A kafir. Kapyrus. Guess where it comes from. The cover was a tefach. So how big was the Aron? 10. Kapyrus said, Harika, that's Aron. 9 plus 1 is 10. Viksiv, so what? So what if the Aron was 10? Viksiv, v'ne'adilcha Sham, v'dbat yitcha mala kapyrus. Hashem says, I will reveal myself to you. There, v'dbat yitcha mala kapyrus. Hashem says, I will speak to you from on top of the kapyrus. So Hashem is above 10 tefachim, above this kapyrus, which is 10 tefachim high, and He'll speak to you above the kapyrus. So speak to Moshe above the kapyrus. So Moshe used to go into Ayal, and Moshe spoke to Hashem. Hashem was looking from above the kapyrus. Turn the page. Hey, Amud Aleph, V'tanya, Rabbi Yossi, it says Rabbi Yossi. So what? La'ayla me'aylam la'yarda shchina l'mata. Hashem's divine presence never came down to earth. V'layala Moshe, and Moshe never went up to Shemayim. V'layala Morim, and Shenema, sorry. Ma'ayla the Shechina Lamata. The Shechina never came down to below the ground, right? To the ground. Right? Shenemar says, "V'layala Moshe Lamam." Hashem and Moshe never went up to Shemayim. Shenemar Shemayim la Hashem. V'aretz nasan l'vnei Adam. The heavens are God, belongs to God. That's where He dwells. Shemayim Hashem. The heavens are Hashem's, are God's. V'aretz nasan l'vnei Adam. And the land was given to man, and Hashem doesn't go to. He's up there, we're down here, and there's never a mingle. We never really get together in the same place at the same time. So says the gemorah, is this true? It says in the pasuk, "V'yered Hashem el Har Sinai." It says Hashem came down to Har Sinai, right? It's a pasuk. Hashem came on Har Sinai. The gemorah answers, "L'mala masar." It means He came to Har Sinai, but He was always 10 tefachim above Har Sinai. In other words, Hashem never, His presence never dwells below 10 tefachim. So when it says He came to Har Sinai, it means He was above the 10 tefachim. He was on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, but above 10 tefachim. Says in the gemorah, it says His legs will stand on that day in the future. Let it be soon. His legs He'll plant His feet on Har Zeisim. And this implies more, the Rishonim explain, or the Achronim rather, this more implies He's actually touching the mountain. Why? Because He's standing. V'amdu. He's standing, and you can't stand in the air. You normally stand on the ground, right? So if he's standing on Har Zeisim, that means he's actually touching the mountain, below 10. L'mayla masar tvachim. Well, it's the same thing. L'mayla masar tvachim, meaning this is also above 10 tvachim. So the Ben Yoda explains, what does this mean? The Havamin was that there's some type of, whatever it means. Obviously Hashem can't stand, he's got a physical goof, but there's something of Havamin that the Torah is trying to tell me that there's going to be something similar to him standing on Har Zeisim, right? But that means he's going to be attached to Har Zeisim, standing on Har Zeisim. And the answer is no. This is also totally allegorical. It doesn't mean it literally. It also means above 10 tvachim. But he's going to be acting like he's standing. Whatever that means. When you stand, whatever that means, as opposed to almost sitting. That's what the Pasuk's trying to convey. But it doesn't mean that he's going to be standing, and so he's obviously not touching the mountain. Sorry, 1 second. All right. Says the gemorah. Did Moshe, Eliyahu, Navi, did they not go up to heaven? It isn't a possible. Moshe Allah Elohim. Moshe went up to God. Moshe Allah Elohim. Moshe went up to God. Well, says Lamata Masara. That means he went below 10. He went up, but he's still below 10. I guess so. It means that Hashem was right above the 10. He was right below the 10. That means he went up to God, meaning right up to the 10. It says Eliyahu went fiery chariot to Shemayim. He went up. Lamata Masara, also below 10. What does this mean? Mach is like echois, the word to grab. He grabbed onto the pnei kisei. Moshe grabbed hold of the Hashem's throne. Parsha is like the spread, the frost. Parsha of Hashem spread on him his cloud. So the Medrash says that, okay, we're not going to get to the Medrash what this means, but what do you see from here? Let's get to the technical details. Moshe held on to the Kisei HaKavod. You said he was below 10. He was holding the Kisei HaKavod. Machas Pnei Kisei. He was holding the Kisei HaKavod. He was holding Hashem's glorious throne. V'amar of Tanchum says, Melamed, Shapires, Hashem spread Shakai, Hashem spread Miziv Shechinosi V'anonai, Olav. Hashem spread his holy glory on Moshe. Hashem spread his glory on Moshe. It says because the Malachim wanted to harm him. So Hashem protected Moshe with his clouds. It means that Hashem lowered his holy throne till the 10th Fachim line, and Moshe held on to it from there. So the Gemara says, Bishlim Ma'arain Tisha. Okay, so I understand now that the ark, the Aron was 9 Tvachim, right? Why was the ark 9 Tvachim? How do you know the ark was 9 Tvachim? It says, V'asu Aron Atzei Shittim. You should make the Aron out of Atzei Shittim, I think it's cedar wood. Amasayim V'chetzi Arkai, 1.5, Amasayim V'chetzi Arkai, 2.5 amas length, V'ama V'chetzi Roich, by 1.5 amas width, V'ama V'chetzi Kaimasai, 1.5 amas high. Interesting, I just remember now, why the midas of the Aron always 1.5, 2.5? To show us that we're always missing something. You never show them, right? Always a half. You're halfway there. So, but the height was 1.5 feet tall. So, and what? And Rashi explains, an amma is 6 tefachim. So it's 6 plus a half is 3. 6 and 3, if I remember correctly from primary school, is 9. So it was 9 tefachim high, right? Says the Gemara, but how do I know? Ella kapairis tefach midan. From where are you getting this? The kapairis, the kafir of the Aron, was a tefach. Now the Aron was actually open on top. It wasn't sealed. It was covered with a kapairis. It was a thick piece of gold. lying on top of the aron. Minal, how do I know that that was a tefach? So that's going to be a little bit of a sukkah now. How do we know the measurements of the kapiris that cover the aron, this gold plate or gold tile, however you call it, a gold panel sat on top of the aron? There's 2.5 amas long, 1.5 amas wide. How do I know that that was a tefach, 10 centimeters thick? This is like a nice big piece of gold, solid gold over here. Says the gemorah, how do it was a tefach? So gemorah says, it says in the Brisa, Reb Chaim, all the vessels that Moshe made must have been Torah's midah, Torah midas arkon and midas racham and midas komosa. Everything that was given to Moshe to make, it says how wide it is, how tall it is, how long it is. Kapairis, but the kapairis midas arkon, midas racham nasna. We know the length, we know the width. Midas komosa and lasna. It doesn't say how thick it's supposed to be. So how do I know how thick it is? Let's learn this out from the smallest of the other utensils. Shneimar, it says, "Vasisaloi misgeres tefach soviv malon tefach avkan tefach." What was the smallest other thing in the base in the mikdash? The misgeres, the border going around the shulchan. That was a tefach. So if the smallest shear was a tefach, this is also a tefach. In other words, there's no reason to make this shear smaller than anything else. This should also be a tefach. Malon tefach avkan tefach. So Gemara asks, what do you mean? If you're going to learn from this, the border of the shulchan, let's learn from kelim itself. And we have this kelim. So Gemara answers, tefasta meruba, tefasta meruba, like tefasta miyut, tefasta. Hold on. What does Rashi say over here? So, why are you, so the Gemara is asking over here, right? You want to learn from the smallest keli, that it was a tefach. There's other kelim that's more than a tefach. Why are you going with the smallest? And the Gemara says a principle here that applies all over Shas. Tefasta murba, tefasta, tefasta. If you try and grab something big, it's not going to work. If you try and take something small, it works. That's a literal translation. In other words, you can't bring a proof from here that it's a bigger thing, but it's definitely at least the smallest thing. Okay, so you can always learn from the smallest. You can't learn from the biggest. In other words, whatever proof you have for something, if you can prove A or B, and B is bigger than A, B is more than A, but if you try and prove B, well, it could be some of it's wrong. Maybe it's not the whole of B. So the whole proof goes out the window. But if it's at least A, then you've got A. A works. So in other words, like this. So I just saw, it seems to be that someone will bring a rye from here. It's working with Torah's suffix. We don't know. When you have a shaila, you don't know what something is, right? So you have a suffix deraisa. Is this mutar to eat or also to eat? Deraisa. Is it a pig or is it cow? So suffix is a shaila, it's a machlekes. Rambam arrived, the suffix deraisa l'kula or l'chumra, midaraisa. So someone will bring a rye from here that midaraisa, it's l'kula. Because otherwise, why don't you make a bigger share? Here you have a suffix deraisa. Is it the smaller shares are the bigger share? So if suffix deraisa l'chumra, midaraisa, you should have to use the bigger share. Alma midaraisa, you see from midaraisa it's l'kula. If you don't know what the share is, how big it is, with the rice, you can use the smallest quantity, that's the rice. Otherwise, with the rice, you have a suffix here, you have to use the bigger share. How could you use the smaller quantity here if the suffix the rice would be l'chumra? So you see from here, the suffix the rice is with the rice, it's l'kula. Midrabanan, you got to be machmer. But midoraisa, it's you got to be machmer. In other words, when you have a biblical suffix, right? We say suffix deraisa look chumra, suffix derabanan look kula. Why do you have to be machmer on the suffix deraisa? Why do you have to say no? I can't eat. It's suffix pig. Can you eat it or not? Some say biblically you can't eat it. Some say rabbinically you can't eat it. That's a machlekes. So it could be from here you could prove that you can't eat it. That's only rabbinically. Biblically you could eat it. The rabbis say don't eat it. It's a suffix. Don't eat it. But midoraisa you could eat it. So that's one nukuda over here. Others want to say that this tefasta, merubah tefasta, is that itself is not a suffix. It's not working with Torah suffix. You don't know what to do, so at least take the minimum because it's definitely less than the minimum, right? I'll say no. This is a principle that tefasta, merubah tefasta means the Torah is telling you that this is vadai. It's for sure. The shir, it's definitely a tefach. If that's the smallest thing you can learn from here, then that's definitely the din. It's not working with Torah. Maybe we don't know, so at least grab the minimum. Okay, says the gemorah. V'neilif mitzitz. Let's learn out the size of the kaperes from the tzitz. What was the tzitz? The Kohen Gadol wore on his forehead a gold plate, and it said on it, Kodesh Lashem, holy to Hashem, right? A thin gold plate on his forehead. Imagine, you know, like some people wear like, a scarf, a bandana, it says on it like, I don't know what. It's a very powerful image to see someone with like, something on their forehead. Awesome image. So he wore this thing that said Kodesh Lashem on his forehead. So let's learn that from the tzitz. How big was the tzitz? The tiny tzitz daima kamintas. The tzitz was like a flattened shazav, a flattened piece of gold. V'rachav base its voice. It was 2 fingers wide. A mukaf ma'izin, it went from ear to ear, 2 fingers wide, from ear to ear, and it said like Kodesh Lashem. And it says the cost of all of beis shitin. It says there was 2 rows on it. It said yud and then hey milamala. The letters yud and the letter hey on top. The kodesh and lamed, the word kodesh and the letter lamed, kodesh la, and then Hashem underneath milamata.
Shouldn't it be the other way around?
Asking a great question. It should say
Kodesh La Hashem.
Kodesh La and then Hashem.
Right.
So why did it say Hashem on top of the Kodesh La? It says Hashem Kodesh La. So that's how Rashi understands it. It says Hashem Kodesh La underneath. Hashem's name on top. Because you can't have Hashem's name below something else. So you have to have Hashem's name on top. Take a look in places. Once you're asking, take a look in places. First of all, let's see the top places. The gemorah says, or the Brisa, he's quoting, says the letters were Yud K, right? Says Taisus, Alpha Pisha Yud and Hey Shem Gomer. The name Yud K, that's a name of Hashem. Yud K is the name of Hashem. There's Ka is Shem Hashem, but it doesn't. It's not. It didn't say Yud K. It said the full name Yud K Vav K. It said the 4-letter name. It didn't say the 2-letter name. So why here does the gemorah say a 2-letter name? So Alpha Pisha Yud and Hey is Shem Gomer. That's a full name. Ein Zeh Shem Beis Yosef. You're allowed to say the name Ka. Someone that says Hashem's name, it's also Gomer to say Hashem's name. It's forbidden. You can't say God's name. But saying Yud K is not saying Hashem's name. Ein Zeh Shem Beis Yosef. If you just say 2 letters, when you say the name Shka, you're not saying the full name. It's a different name. In other words, the gemorah here is saying Yud K not as the name of Hashem. The gemorah here is saying Yud K as a shortened version of Yud K Vav K. In other words, the gemorah is not saying you write Yud K, that's Hashem's name. It's saying it as part of as half of the full name. So he's not quoting B'chalal. The gemorah is not talking about Hashem's full name. He's not talking about the name Yud K. He's talking about half of the name Yud K Vav K. In other words, there's no doubt that they wrote on the tzitz Yud K Vav K. That's what it said. It didn't say Yud K. It said Yud K Vav K. So the price is not talking about the name Ka. The price is talking about Yud K Vav K. The problem of saying Hashem's name is if a person explains Hashem's 42-letter name. Even though it's talking about the Hashem's 42-letter name. We're careful with all of his names. You shouldn't say any of Hashem's names, even though it's really only an Issa with the 42-letter name. But I guess out of respect to Hashem's name, we don't say any of Hashem's name. We're not allowed to say Hashem's name. I saw some people that might not to say God, that apparently that's not Hashem's name. The person say there's nothing wrong with it. You don't have to write G-D. It's not God's name. Some want to bring a proof from this Taisvus that even when you say two-letter name, how does this work? You shouldn't say Yud and then the letter Hey. You should say Yud K, as opposed to Yud and then Hey. You should say Yud K. Even when you say the letters, it's not enough. Even when you're saying Hashem's name, are you allowed to say the letters Yud then K then Vav then K, or Yud then Hey then Vav then Hey? Right? No, you can't even say, because here the Gemara says, according to Taisus, you can't even say the letters of Hashem's name one after the other. You should say, that's why people say Yud K as opposed to Yud then Hey. You shouldn't even say the letters Yud and then Hey. That's why people switch it for Yud then K. Sure. And then it says the next Taisus, Kodesh, Leman da'amim milamata. What does this mean? Kodesh lamed milamata. Kodesh lashem, Kodesh la, that went underneath. So again, we're talking about the Kohen Gadol's tzitz, and it said Kodesh la. Says Taisus, Yesh mefarshim Rashi, lemata mamish zeh lemala mizeh. So according to Rashi, it said Kodesh la, and underneath it said God's name, Hashem. V'olay mistabed. It says, it doesn't make sense. Why? That's not how you read it. You read Kodesh Lashem. You read down. You don't read up. You read Kodesh Lashem, not Kodesh Lashem. Why would the Kohen Gadol have it the wrong way around on his head? Says Taisvus, Ali yeshivs zeh shelei keneged zeh. Kodesh lamed b'tchila shita atachtoina v'Hashem b'seif shita l'yoyna. In other words, it said underneath Kodesh la, and on top it said here Hashem. So you'd read it coming from left to right. You'd see first the Kodesh la, that was below, and then if you carry on the line, it was further up, Hashem. In other words, it's less of a problem. You still normally read from the top line, you read Hashem, Kodesh la, but since when you're reading from left to right, you first hit the Kodesh la, and then afterwards you see Hashem. So it'd say Kodesh la, and then Hashem. And Hashem was above, but you still read it after the Kodesh la. That's how Taisus wants to say. So you got a machlokes Rashi Taisus where the Kodesh and the la was. We have a third opinion, which is that it said, well, what's the third opinion over here? Kodesh, I forget, maybe we'll see it inside. Okay, so that's the first opinion of the gemorah. Rashi Taisus, Kodesh Lashem, but we'll bring a raya here that the actual tzitz was two fingers deep. Kodesh Lashem. Okay. It says the gemorah. Sorry, and before we get the heart of this machlokes, the Gemara is going to now refute this thing that the Kodesh and Hashem was on two lines. So there's a famous story, it's brought down in a few Gemaras, that the Romans, the evil Roman Empire, they made decrees on the Jews. They couldn't learn Torah, they weren't allowed to study, they weren't allowed to do bris milah, and a delegation of the elders of Israel went to Rome to fight this decree. Reb Shimon bar Yochai went, I think, together with Reb Eliezer bar Yasi, and the story happened that something happened to the Caesar's daughter, and they saved her, and therefore they gave him permission to go into the treasure troves and take and see whatever they wanted, take what they wanted. I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember exactly, but he went into the treasure troves in Rome, and he saw the beautiful kalim that the Romans stole from the Beit HaMikdash, and he saw the tzitz He saw the actual tzitz that was in the Beis Hamikdash. Again, he lived approximately 160 years after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, or 100 plus years after the Churban Beis Hamikdash. He was from the early Mishnah. It was a time of Rishon Bar Yochai, so you're talking about the Churban happened in the year 70, and this is like a year 160 or something like that. So this was like way after, 100 years after. He wouldn't actually have seen the tzitz in the Beis Hamikdash, but he saw it in Rome. I went there, he saw in the treasure troves of Rome, he saw the tzitz. And what did it say? Ani Yisif Boraimi, I saw it in Rome. V'kosav alav Kodesh Lashem b'shita achas. It's one line. It wasn't on two lines, it said Kodesh Lashem, one line. So I saw someone explain, so why on earth did the Chacham argue on this? They weren't Chayzer. He said, I saw it. He argued with me, I saw it. It said Kodesh Hashem. So in one line. So why were they stubborn and said, no, Hashem was first? They had this Messiah that said first Hashem and then Kodesh La. So what the Mepharshim explain is that b'di'evet it's fine if it said Hashem or Kodesh Hashem on one line. It's like a hiddur to have it on two lines. And the tzitz was made individually based on the size of the Kohen Gadol's forehead. This wasn't one tzitz that went for a thousand years. I guess maybe worn out, different Kohanim had different size foreheads. But it's supposed to cover the Kohen Gadol's forehead. So maybe they made different ones. But the Eved, this was one of the ways it could be done. And so this was, so the Eved, they did it like that. I mean, it could be, I don't know how we would know that this was for sure the tzitz in the Beis Hamikdash. Maybe this was a replica and it was a mismade replica. I don't know. Like, how does he know that this was the real tzitz from the Beis Hamikdash? That's what he thought, that's for sure. I guess no one else would have written the Shem Hashem and done that. It was also okay. So it says the gemorah. So we want to know, why do we learn from the tzitz? Just like the tzitz was 2 fingers, approximately one says 2 fingers, it covers the sky's forehead. That was the size it is. So why are you saying the papyrus, the cover of the ark, has to be a tefach? Make it 2 fingers. Says the Gemara, done in kli mekli, and done in kli metachshit. We learn out a vessel, a utensil, or kli from a utensil. Vein done in kli metachshit. You can't learn out a utensil from a tachshit is a ornament, right? A tachshit, jewelry. So the tzitz is more like an ornament, it's jewelry, it's like a crown. It's not kli, it's not a utensil. So the Gemara says v'neilif mizer. Let's learn out from there was a zer, a crown that went around the shulchan. Damamar, zer was mashu. There was a little crown around the shulchan, a little gold zer that went around the zer zahav saviv, and that was a mashu. It was this tiny thing. Done in kli mekli, and done in kli mekli, ve'im done in kli mehechshekli. You learn a kli from a kli, the actual utensil, the actual vessel, whatever it is. You call that out from a hechshekli, which is just an addition to a kli, something that it's like a crown of a kli, like a tachshit of a kli. A hechshekli is something that makes it a little bit better, right? So ihachi mizgeres nami. So why you learn from mizgeres? The mizgeres was around the shulchan. That's also the Gemara assumes that's also a hechshekli. That wasn't part of. That wasn't main to shulchan. That was an addition, right? Says the Gemara. So it depends. So the Gemara says, "Entan hechshekli. Iachim mizgeres nami hechshekli hu." So mizgeret lemata haisa. No, the mizgeret wasn't on top of the shulchan. It was under the shulchan. In other words, like this: you got your 4 legs, and then there's a plata on top. And the Gemara assumed that this mizgeres, this border, was on top. There's a little border, a little lip, they call it, going around the top of the shulchan. And then it's not part of the kli, it's an addition. It's an addition, you don't need it, it's nice to have it, it's good to have it, but it's an additional part. The Gemara says, now no, it wasn't an additional part. You had the 4 legs. On top of the 4 legs, you had this mizgeret, you had this border. And on top of that sat the piece on top. And therefore, it's not an additional, it's part of the etzem kli. And so therefore we can learn from it. We know that was a tefach, you had a leg, and then you had one pefach thing going around, and on top of that sat the table. Okay, so hinicha, that's all very well. The mandam is got to lamata if the mizgat was underneath. And the mandam is got to lamata if the mizgat was on top. I saw my ikala mema. What are you going to say? Hi hechsheklihu. It's a hechshekli, and we're back to the original question. Elo donin dova shet nisnat b'teira mida midova shnisnat b'teira mida v'alichichit tzitz v'zeh shloi nisnat b'teira mida klal. We want to learn out from something that the Torah says black and white mafurish what the size is. But we're not going to learn from tzitz or zer, because that or mizgeres, because there the Torah doesn't say clearly what the size is. We know that the size was 2 fingers, but it doesn't say that in the Torah. We want to learn out only from things that says clearly black and white. Take a look at the last thesis. So the tzitz rach of shtet spas. How do we know that the tzitz is only 2 fingers? This is rabbinical. The tzitz is 2 fingers. Al mitzchay. He goes on his forehead. Nishir mitzchay stam metzach rach of shtet spas. Most foreheads is 2 fingers, and therefore it has to be 2 fingers. But it wasn't that that's the size of the zer. If a crane girl's got a big head, it can have a big tzitz. That's not the point. Normally, a forehead is 2 fingers. That's why it's 2 fingers. It's not deraisa. Someone asking Taisus, why do you have to say it's darbonon? It could be deraisa, just it doesn't say it. We want to learn from something that says clearly what the size is. Why does Taisus has to go ahead and say it's darbonon? Maybe it's not darbonon. It just doesn't say mufurish in the Torah. Why do you want to learn from something that clearly states the size? From that we want to learn. We don't want to learn from something that doesn't clearly say the size. Okay, have a wonderful day. We have to wrap up over here. Shkoyach.